She was intelligent enough and sharp enough and beautiful enough and to be able to manipulate almost any situation so that it became something which was totally her own. I have never in all the years that I've photographed, and it's many years, seen anyone with the ability to do that. And she did it superbly. But she played. She was able to assess each photographer, even if it was only an amateur with a box camera. She worked with the same intensity and diligence that she would have if she were working with a top professional. And she was very clever. She was, when she sensed a camera, because sometimes I didn't even know there was anybody else there with a camera, suddenly the breasts would heave up, the back, the buttocks would jut out, and there she was. She was a movie star. The smile was brilliant. She was always sort of golden looking, and because she had a down, just very fine golden hairs all around on her face, it trapped the light. It was extraordinary. I've never seen it before, and acted as a nimbus so that she looked almost angelic. And it was kind of marvelous to photograph her, and the fun was to watch what she would do, because you would set a situation. You would say, shall we do so-and-so? And she would say, fine, let's go with it.
Eve Arnold took photographs of Marilyn Monroe in the 50s and early 60s, when still photographs were essential to any ambitious starlet. Marilyn knew exactly what fed the camera, and always managed to take control of a photographic session. It was her favourite medium, and she had worked hard at creating an image of herself which she knew the camera would capture. By the time they met, Marilyn had already appeared on the cover of Life magazine. They became friends, and to fulfill a promise to Marilyn, Eve has now published an appreciation of the work they did together, going back to the original contact sheets and colour prints. Eve Arnold is one of the world's top photojournalists, and in addition to assignments for newspapers and magazines, she has published collections of her photographs, including The Unretouched Woman, a stunning and compassionate glimpse of the lives and condition of women in many parts of the world. She spent 5 months in China, and the results were a compelling document of its people and moods. She was an early member of Magnum, a renowned photographic agency, and it was at the beginning of her career that Marilyn asked to meet her.
What happened was Marilyn had seen a set of pictures I'd done for Esquire on Marlene Dietrich. You must remember that in the 50s, this was, I think, 1952, and in those days, practically everything was front-lit, retouched, very carefully organized. And I didn't know about any of that. And I was a documentary photographer. And I had done this series on Marlene Dietrich, singing the songs that she had made famous during the war, Lily Marlene and Mrs. Otis Regrets and all of those. I simply took her as she was. There was no posing, no setup, no lighting, no tripod, just me and Marlene singing. And there we were working on this, and we were both at a party for John Huston, given at 21 in New York. And Sam Shaw, the mutual friend, brought her over and introduced us, and she looked at me and she said, if you did that well with Marlene, can you imagine what you can do with me? Which I thought was quite wonderful, because she had a naive quality, but she also had a great sense of showmanship and self-promotion, and she could see herself, I was sure, in what she was going to look like in Esquire. So I said that I would ask my editors and we would talk about it, and I can't remember anymore why it took so long, but it must have taken 6 months or so. When I had looked for a place in which to photograph her, I had found both a playground and what looked like a dramatic Chinese landscape with bamboo and grasses, what looked like elephant grasses, and I figured it would look like anywhere. And then she had put on a leopard skin bathing suit. So she really looked like an animal going through the forest, and I thought that would be marvelous. However, when we got there, to my chagrin, I found that it had rained the night before, and the place was muddy and wet and sludgy and black. And she was wonderful. She lay in it, she stood in it, she romped in it. She was just a delight. And her hands were just covered in mud, and her knees and her legs. And when we got through, she was laughing and I was laughing. And this is part of the thing that kept coming back when I decided to do the book. After I did the session in the bulrushes and the playground, I went to see her to show her the stuff. Now, I was so inexperienced that I didn't know that unless the arrangement has been made beforehand, you do not go and show your subject what you've done. And I imagine it's done for several reasons, in case they don't like it, or in case they decide that they want to be the editor and whatever. But, you feel that your right as a photographer might have been challenged. At any rate, because I didn't know, and I would have gone anyhow, because I liked her and I wanted her to be happy with me, I went to see her, and we had a rather strange session. She was staying at the Waldorf. She was on suspension from 20th Century Fox, still trying to work out her own company. And when I arrived at her door, she had on a diaphanous black negligee, nothing underneath, a hairbrush in her hand. And she said, if you can wait until I'm interviewed, there's a lady coming from, I've forgotten the magazine, somewhere, Middle European magazine. Then we'll look at the pictures afterward. And I said, fine. So I came in, I sat down, and pretty soon there was a knock at the door, and the lady came in, and the lady sat down on a chair, put her bag on a low table, reached over to get the pencil and the pad out, and Marilyn, meanwhile, said, do you mind if I brush my hair? No, said the lady, of course not. But when she looked up, Marilyn was brushing her pubic hair. And that was the kind of joke. That was a little over the top, but there was always something that she would have thought of to intrigue and to amuse. That poor lady was so shocked. She took off instantly. She didn't wait. She asked a few questions and then left. And then Marilyn and I looked at everything, and she loved it. One or two things she wanted destroyed, I told her to cut them up. It was all color. And she did. And I left. And then I didn't hear any more. Months went by. And then one night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, I guess it was, I got a call from her saying that she was going to Beaumont, Illinois, which was about 1,500 miles from New York. And would I join her at 10 o'clock the next morning and go to Beaumont with her? I could have an exclusive story because it'd be only she and her hairdresser. And I said, what are you going to be doing? She said, I'm going to bring art to the masses, which seemed like a strange thing. And what she said was that there was going to be an art show in Beaumont. She was going out to open the art show. And she'd gone along, and it was a horrendous day. Because in those days, we flew first to Chicago, then waited 2 hours for another plane, then we flew to Champaign, Illinois, then the governor's escort with a car and some outriders on motorbikes picked us up, and they piped us into Beaumont, which was another 80 miles away. And she had forgotten to bring, she had a kidney condition, she'd forgotten to bring her pills, and so her ankles swelled. But she was very game, she was really terrific, and she lay down and she rested and she ate grapes, and there was a clamor around the place you couldn't believe. People were knocking on the windows in the house where she was. And then, after a couple of hours, the celebration started. She made a speech about our late beloved president, and she was supposed to be talking about Lincoln. It sounded like Eisenhower when she got through, who was president at the time. She was wonderful. And it was in Chicago when we had that heavy layover, which took hours. And she went into the ladies' room. And, you know, as another woman, I just followed after. I didn't intend to shoot. But she looked so wonderful with her skirts hiked up and those little fat chubby legs, which nobody thought of as being that way, hanging out below. because I always thought of her as kind of slender, and what she had, which was wonderful, was a capacity to think tall, because she was small. And so you would look at her, and some days it would just break your heart because she looked a little dumpy. And then you would photograph her, and she would photograph 10 pounds lighter, which is against every rule in the book. She would be able to bring herself up and sort of stretch so you had a sense of length, which wasn't there. It was also different from what you would expect. You know, you would see it, and you could see the transformation before your eyes while you were filming, and that was kind of marvelous. You see, she had built a character, and she felt secure with the character. So she stayed with it. And somewhere along the line, it seems to me that as long as she believed that she was Marilyn Monroe and a movie star, and she wasn't yet, that was fine. She could cope with that. She could deal with it. She loved it. When the fantasy became the reality, it was no longer tenable for her. She found that she then was fragmented. Everybody wanted something from her, but it was always the public to whom she played. She would put on a performance that would be extraordinary, no matter where she went, and that was heart and soul to her. That was identity. That was the person that she was, and the person she wanted to be. I photographed her over a 10-year stretch. There were 6 photographic sessions, in addition to which we saw each other socially. But in the beginning, there was something like the shortest of the 6 sessions was 2 hours, and the longest was 2 months on the film The Misfits that John Huston directed. Arthur Miller had written a short story which was intended to tell a tale about 3 men who were adventurers, worked on the desert, and brought in the wild horses, which they then sold. They roped, lassoed, and took them prisoners, so to speak, and then sent them off to be killed for dog food. And into this wildlife of theirs came Marilyn. But in the short story, I don't think Marilyn was part of that. When Arthur met Marilyn, he then rewrote the story. It then became the basis for the film called The Misfits. It had Clark Gable in the lead. It had Marilyn as a female lead. It had Montgomery Clift, Eli Wallach. But it was meant to be exquisitely made. It was meant to be a small statement, but very serious. And it was meant to bring Marilyn forward as a very serious actress. And this was Miller's Valentine to Marilyn. The marriage was already over, but what he had wanted to do with it was to give her a gift, and he did, I think. She adored all of it. She loved the attention. She loved these very handsome men. What she didn't like was the fact that they were all such polished actors. When they kept changing lines, they would just read them off and be word perfect. And she would have difficulty because she didn't have the training, and B, she was troubled, and it was difficult to remember the lines when she was going through a trying time. But she did like them, and then there was always the business of their touching her. She would be touching them. And when you think back over it, it seems like a cry for help. Actually, what it was, I think, is just a need for human physical contact. And there's one pyramid where I have Clift and Ralph Roberts. And Roberts is rubbing Marilyn's shoulders, Clift is rubbing Robert's shoulders, and so on.